Please start, ma'am.
All right, Shubham, thank you. So, good evening, everyone. So, I welcome you all to today's session. As you know, we are discussing gastric cancer nowadays. And after discussing the basic anatomies, physiologies, the radiology, and other aspects, we have now reached to discuss the neoadjuvant modalities in treatment of gastric cancer. And as you know, the format is a talk followed by a panel discussion, elaborate discussion on the very topic which we have chosen. And amongst us, we have all eminent faculty members. The talk will be given by Dr. Piyush, and I think he needs no introduction. So without going into much formality of introduction, so after Dr. Piyush, the session on this neoadjuvant strategies will be moderated by Dr. Vivek, and the panelists would be Dr. Azhar and Dr. Amit, Dr. Makarand, and Dr. Ashutosh. So I welcome you all on board, and Dr. Piyush will also be joining in our panel discussion. We all will be enriching by all of your experiences. So I request Dr. Piyush, without wasting time, to take over this session, please.
So many thanks to Dr. Shefali, and this is a great platform for students. I have been seeing this, and I have attended a few of them. So neoadjuvant strategies in carcinoma stomach, and that this is what we are discussing today. But I would also touch upon the adjuvant strategies as well, because there is where we actually took it from, that neoadjuvant would be a better way to go. So this would be the flow of my talk: a brief touch on epidemiology, and then tumor biology and the current guidelines, and of course the neoadjuvant strategies. So we know that if you're talking about this particular malignancy, definitely it is the cardia and the GE junction is definitely on the rise, but otherwise there has been a downtrend. But of course, the number of deaths what we are seeing every year world over is enormous, and this is because we are still trying to find the best way, the best strategy to treat this particular cancer. And definitely in India also, it has been a challenge in terms of mortality, in terms of new cases. So definitely stomach cancer is one important disease pattern. Molecular classifications, this has come up now, and this is basically something new. And this is a lot of data from NCI data bank, genomic data bank, where they have subgrouped into nearly 4 subtypes: the CIN, that is the intestinal histology subtype, which is near the G junction and the cardia, and then the EBV subtype, which is around 9%. There are a set of mutations, as you can see over here. This is one immune-rich cell type, and then again the MSI, or the very hyper-mutated type, which is again, this one subtype is one where we can actually say, okay, there would be response to immunotherapy, there would be hypermutations over here, and therefore you can, from this subtype, predict that, okay, immunotherapy could work. And then there is one very aggressive diffuse histology, the diffuse histology subtype, which is usually associated with CDH1 sort of mutations and cell addition mutations. The protein of cell addition is missing over there. So nearly 20% of it. So the clinical trials and the stomach cancer biology, right now there has been no much of relation. We have been struggling hard to actually define the stomach cancer biology, and clinical trials have been trying to look into it, but so far it has been chemotherapy, radiotherapy, post-surgery or before surgery. So this is where we are, that we have realized now that alone doing a surgical treatment is not good enough in stomach cancer. You would definitely end up having some relapses, and as you can see in this table, especially once there is a nodal positivity. the gates are open. Actually, the data describes it as the nodes are not the gatekeepers, but are when the disease actually has reached the node, the gates have been actually opened. So it is more of that the disease has spread like wildfire if it's a nodal disease. So if the disease is involving the nodes, it's a real big problem. And you can see the survival curves. The patterns of failure in surgery alone has been looked into in some old data, and MSKCC data, which was published in 2004, showed that this pattern of relapse is actually loco-regional as well after a good surgery, and of course distant as well. And then there are subgroup of patients who would relapse in the peritoneum. And then there are a lot of overlaps, as you can see. So when we say loco-regional, you definitely require a good loco-regional treatment, both surgery and radiation also will have its place. Distant relapse, of course, you need some good systemic therapy. And peritoneal relapse, well, then the role of, again, local therapies come over here. Local HIPEC therapies definitely come over here. So talking about the guidelines, what do the guidelines say? For now, this is what is the ESMO saying, that if in case you are talking about operable more than a T1 stage of stomach cancer, you should consider a preoperative chemotherapy, and then thereafter surgery, and of course then the adjuvant. Thereafter, if in case you end up doing a surgery first for whatever reason, then adjuvant chemoradiation, there are trials, and of course adjuvant chemotherapy, there are trials. So this is what is a European Union following. And when you change the continent, you come towards Japan, you would find it would be more towards the surgical side. They would rather wait for preoperative chemotherapy for some time before they include the preoperative chemotherapy. They would do more of surgeries and then include the adjuvant treatment. Talking about what is the US doing, and this is again quite similar. They have actually put in that clinically T2 or higher. They have defined it over there, and clinically T2 or higher, they have kept an option of preoperative chemotherapy as the preferred option again. So preoperative chemoradiation trials are going on. Probably there has been some data from NeoAegis now. So they have just included it, but then I think so we need to get more data on that. So this is what it is. The other thing is that you also get a lot of overlap between the GE junction tumors and the GE junction esophagus and the stomach trials. So probably category 2B over here of pre-op chemoradiation might find its place because of the same. Talking about the adjuvant strategies, and which have been seeing the way what I practice, and I'm sure my peer group, we have adjuvant is going a bit on the downside. If you get anything above, locally advanced CA stomach, and this is how it all developed. That alone surgery was not enough, and then INT-0116 was one trial which showed that if you are looking into adjuvant treatment with 5-FU one cycle and combining 5-FU and radiotherapy, and then thereafter adjuvant 5-FU 2 more cycles with the dose that is mentioned over here, you would probably have a good relapse-free survival and overall survival. Now this data was adjuvant data, and after a lot of gap, there was something to offer to our patients. This was encouraging data from US, and if we look at this data today, we find that only 10% had D2 dissection, which is now has now become the standard in most of our centers, and 54% had D0 dissection. Basically, this was the 1990s when this patient data set was being included. D2 plus dissection and diffuse subtype appears to benefit less from adjuvant chemoradiation. This was realized in this data. Also, the main benefit was found that there is a definite reduction in loco-regional recurrences, but distant metastases were similar. What was challenging to deliver was to complete the treatment because of these sort of toxicities, and grade 3-4 toxicities were significant. And then you have some data coming from Japan, and this was very impressive, molecule S1, which was showing that if you, in case you give this particular molecule, you will actually benefit enormously, especially in early stages. And overall, there was a decent, benefit in terms of absolute benefit in overall survival, nearly, as you can see, 6% in stage 3B. So this was impressive. And some now data showing that S1 6 months is also going to be good enough. And some good news I got today evening from one of the companies is that S1 is going to be launched in India very soon. So looking forward to this actually. So gastric group meta-analysis basically showed, and this was a collation of some 17 trials, and predominantly 5-FU based chemotherapy basically. And this showed that definitely, yes, you should not just do surgery alone and give, additional treatment. And there is a 5-year overall survival of absolute benefit of 5.7%. So talking about the next in line, one of the famous trials, the classic trials, which actually was from South Korea, and 6 months of Capox versus surgery alone was looked into. And there, as you know, that D2 gastrectomy is their favorite. Now D3 in that part, Japan is doing that. And they actually compared Capox 8 cycles versus observation, and there was a definite benefit over there in terms of disease-free survival and 5-year overall survival. Now look at the curve, the standard curve of overall survival, 69%. And if you remember the last what we saw in INT, it was down below less than 50%. So somewhere the surgery, the type of surgery that this part of the continent is doing, this part of the world is doing, is absolutely different, or probably more extensive than the Western world. So when we look at these two adjuvant treatments, the S1 and the Capox, so now since so far S1 was not available to us, most of us initially did bring in Capox for treatment, and we did find that Capox was a good treatment. Patients could tolerate it well, and then this is some cross-trial comparison that S1, if we see the hazard ratios are best in stage 2, Capox in benefits more in nodal positive disease. S1 is less toxic, but the Capox was more as per the classic trial data. But we see that Capox in our patients, in our Indian set of patients, is quite deliverable. Of course, neuropathy of auxiliary platinum is an issue that we see. Now, when we talk about adjuvant treatment, and there was some conversation that Indian data, what is the Indian data on this? Definitely adjuvant chemotherapy, there are delays which actually post-surgery are a concern, and that is why switching gear towards neoadjuvant is a favorable strategy. And this is a data from All India Institute, and presented this ESMO as a poster, showing that after a multivariate analysis, they found that beyond 8 weeks, if the treatment is going, and nearly 1/3 of their patients, around 350 patients they analyzed, and nearly 1/3 of the patients actually ended up going beyond 8 weeks, and that was very detrimental for prognosis. So problems with post-operative, as I mentioned, that it's a late start. Now, advantages again for the perioperative or the neoadjuvant treatment. Of course, these are some of the basics. When we choose neoadjuvant therapy, is that we look at these particular fundamentals. And the data, if we talk about, is one of the famous trials, the MAGIC trial over here. As we can see, the 3 ECF and surgery, followed by the 3 ECF, epirubicin, cisplatin, and 5-FU. Basically, what MAGIC showed remained in practice for quite some time, and epirubicin was, being used despite a lot of oral ulcers and mucositis issues patients were having. Again, there was this data, the FFCD data, which showed that just cisplatin and 5-FU could actually bring in quite similar hazard ratios if you do a cross-trial comparison, and you would not lose on much, basically. But most of us were practicing with ECF in there when this data was there. So the lesson learned was in the preoperative strategy with MAGIC and FFCD pre-op trials were that approximately 10% of the patients will not complete preoperative chemotherapy because of some reasons, as in side effects. And post-surgery, approximately 50% of the patients were not, going to be fit enough to complete post-operative chemotherapy. And that was a big number, 50% not being able to complete the entire course of treatment, what you have decided. That definitely brings down the efficiency of treatment somewhere. So building upon that, ECF was not falling out of favor, and therefore this particular regimen was looked upon. Taxanes were in, during that period, and taxanes were found to have good response rate in stomach cancer. And DCF was one regimen which was being used for metastatic gastric cancer, and therefore taxane did find its place in the this particular setting. And this triplet combination of docetaxel, oxaliplatin, 5-FU, after some modifications every 2 weekly, was found quite deliverable. And this was compared in this particular trial. And if you look at the characteristics over here, the sort of, again, these G junction and the stomach tumors are basically clubbed in most of the trials, as I just was mentioning earlier. So here again, CA stomach over here were nearly 44% of the patients in this particular comparison. More than 70 years of patients, actually, these were nearly 24% of the patients. But what my personal experience with elderly and FLOT has been that the FLOT is actually quite okay tolerated even in elderly subset, if you look into the oxaliplatin neuropathy into account. So FLOT, after this, actually started becoming the new standard of care with improvement in PFS and the overall survival. As we can see in this slide, there was definite improvement in overall survival, nearly 20%, 10% 5-year overall survival benefit. There were, of course, increased R0 resection, that is the immediate benefit was also there, and pathological downstaging was also there. If you look at the toxicity, well, each regimen had its own set of toxicities. There was more diarrhea with FLOT, 5-FU. Diarrhea was more with FLOT as compared to ECF. And neutropenia again was more with FLOT. But otherwise, if we talk about the completion of the regimen, and that was the challenge with ECF earlier in the MAGIC trial, we found that patients were able to complete FLOT more likely once, post-surgery. And in practice also, I find that probably immediately after surgery, it is one cycle of FOLFOX, and then I can switch gears towards FLOT after a cycle or a couple of cycles of FOLFOX. Well, the benefit was there in all subgroup of patients, and it was there in advanced stage. The T1 and T2 also, you can see that benefit, and the signet ring histology was also benefiting. And there was this particular trial specifically looking into the signet cell cancers, and there again FLOT was showing that yes, delivering FLOT in a perioperative setting, definitely you would get a benefit in signet cell cancers also. So would radiotherapy help in peri-operative or post-operative period? Well, critics trial over here and ARTIST 1 and 2 basically did not, when we look at this particular graph, it's, we are looking at the overall population, EFS and OS, but with the subgroup analysis, did show that N2 disease patterns, or where there was a D2 less than D2 dissection, there definitely the radiotherapy was improving the disease-free survival. But that was a subgroup analysis. There was also a meta-analysis and a good retrospective large trial from South Korea, which did show the role of RT as well. But most of the prospective trials really failed to show this when we look at the entire cohort. So do you look at for any biomarkers? Upfront, MSI is one biomarker which should be considered, can be considered, but unfortunately data with FLOT is not there, but MSI positives might progress very fast on neoadjuvant, and surgery, straight away surgery alone was better than doing a neoadjuvant strategy. So when we talk about just a gross comparison, where to give perioperative versus adjuvant approaches, that is neoadjuvant. So of course, the preoperative approaches do help in tumor downstaging, R0 dissection, immediate benefit, and test of tumor biology, as always has been medical oncologists, the favorite statement. So, and what are the disadvantages? Of course, you might end up missing the bus, but tumor progression could happen, but then most of the times it's rare. MSI, we should watch out for. Patients might end up not proceeding to surgery. That is one important thing. And of course, over treatment of early stage diseases, that is concerning. Now, that is one important challenge, that you are not actually staging the disease properly most of the times. The recommendations in the books do say that please do a laparoscopic staging prior to neoadjuvant chemotherapy, but I discussed with my surgeons, and most of the times we end up concluding that because of financial logistics and other factors, that laparoscopic staging, we look upon PET-CT as the way to go forward. PET-CT again is a good imaging biomarker. If we are wanting to look at the disease responses, might not be a great biomarker for baseline upfront, staging disease patterns. But then there are some scores which are developing, as you can see over here, that the size of the lymph nodes. There are some criteria which are actually developing in these from various trials where they're trying to look upon PET-CT. This is what that chemo first, definitely where the margins are at risk, bulky tumors and aggressive biology, definitely you should consider chemotherapy first over there. And of course, if there is an emergency, you must consider surgery first, or if otherwise the biomarker, if you're doing MSI high, you find MSI high or Lynch sort of pattern, then you must consider surgery first. But this MSI, again, data is not there for FLOT, but of course, this has to be kept in mind. This is what is NCCN saying, the various recommendations way forward. I think so. Top Gear strategy is one interesting strategy to look for, where radiation some dose 40 gray has been added probably, and this trial would also give some answer. New Edges was there in JCO some July this year, and it did show that it was actually looking at majorly ECF rather than FLOT. So we need to get data from FLOT strategy as well. But the new edges did show that there wasn't much of a difference in the way you perform, whether you add RT or not. HER2 neoadjuvant, we have always been looking for, but are we finally there? I think so. This particular trial of combination of trastuzumab and pertuzumab is showing that you might end up with some good responses and increase in PCR rates, but are we finally there? We really do not know, but it's always attractive. Again, very small subset. Now, as I mentioned that MSI high, what would be the way forward? Well, this is from MD Anderson, some data that MSI high, we know that this is a tissue agnostic marker for immunotherapy, here they actually studied a lot of tumor subset, around 35 patients, and what they found is there were some good PCRs. As you can see, the second line over here, neoadjuvant pembrolizumab resulted in PCR rates of 69% of the amongst patients who underwent surgical resection. And if you look at the date, if you look at the strategy over here, it is just 2 cycles of neoadjuvant pembro earlier and then additional 6 cycles again. So just 8 cycles, and then they are going towards surgery actually. So this is something which is going to be promising, looks promising over here. So to conclude that perioperative strategy in T2 and above tumors is way we are practicing most of the times. FLOT has now become the gold standard. RT does have a role, especially we need to actually find its appropriate place, prime time for precision medicine, but we still have to, look at the biology. Most of the times we do not look at it. MSI, I am not doing it for now. So prime time for biology. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Piyush. That was a very...
Am I audible?
Yeah, Dr. Shefali.
Yeah, am I audible?
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you, Dr. Piyush, for a wonderful, crisp and crux summarization of the strategies.
Thank you, Dr.
So just I will make a formal invite to Dr. Vivek to take over the session for a panel moderation. Dr. Vivek, all yours then.
Thank you, Dr. Shefali. I think it's after Dr. Piyush Bajpayee's elaborative presentation, you can't do a better literature search than a medical oncologist for sure. I tried to do. I really
and
learned
that
a
to
lot.
Dr. Piyush.
Yeah. I tried to find out a lot of things, and I really learned a lot of things even while I was preparing my slides. So I think, but Dr. Piyush, there was lots to learn from that presentation. So sorry, my slides are. Yeah. So we'll take forward the panel discussion on neoadjuvant strategies in gastric cancer. My panelists, we got an esteemed panel, 2 surgeons, Dr. Amit, my colleague from AIIMS. He now heads the GI surgery department at Command Hospital, Pune. Dr. Azhar, who takes care of esophagogastric surgery at Medanta. Dr. Ashutosh, a radiation oncologist at Varanasi. Dr. Makarand and Dr. Piyush Bajpayeee, we already know. And so with this esteemed panel, I look forward to a healthy discussion. And the pattern of the thing is that we have to have a case. So I've got a case, may not exactly be representative, but we'll just take it along as we go. So just to briefly, I just put on this slide just so that we have everybody, especially the audience, has a good idea of what we are talking about when we are talking about T2 disease and more than T2 disease. Now, I think rest of the things we can really miss out, but then when we look at T2 disease, now T2 disease is tumor which invades the muscularis propria. T1 is disease which is confined only to the mucosa, which will be involving the submucosa, and T3 is which goes beyond the muscularis mucosa. So essentially, when we look at these things, we have to understand that our imaging is, besides endoscopic ultrasound, are really limited when we are really trying to differentiate between T1, T2, and maybe even T3 disease. And so this is one thing which we are going to come to next. And so this is essentially the NCCN guidelines recommending the workup. A quick question to all the panelists, like FDG PET would largely be standard in most patients being planned for neoadjuvant therapy. I think most of you would agree. Any differences of opinion?
Yeah, only thing is, Vivek, sometime in mucinous tumors, sometime FDG PET doesn't give you that good result. So we expect false positive, false negative high in PET when you are doing mucinous tumor in histology. That is one thing
Okay.
that need to be kept in
Yeah.
mind.
So a question there, Dr. Azhar. So now in your practice, largely, now kind of my practice has gone a bit haywire. Now, once I have a patient who comes with dyspepsia, some symptoms, elderly patient, you suspect CA stomach, you get an endoscopy done, shows a growth, biopsy taken, even before waiting for the biopsy report. Would you do a CT scan or a PET scan?
I will wait for the biopsy report first.
Okay. Even if the endoscopy shows a clear-cut growth there.
Yeah, yeah. If
Okay.
it's a mucinous histology or signet ring or poorly differentiated, PET is something I will only do after once I plan CT, because of course I don't want to
Okay.
increase the cost.
Okay.
And if the CT scan show bulky disease, of course, nodal disease, and I'm of course planning for neoadjuvant therapy, then possibly I'll go for PET CT, because I will discuss later on that routine neoadjuvant chemotherapy in CS stomach, I can debate whole day.
Yeah. I think any difference of opinion regarding the PET scan? Anybody wants to add a quick word there?
No, I think the PET scans, as I said, about 30% of the cases it will not pick up because of histology. So upfront PET scan may not be there, but I think I would definitely say once there's a growth, I think I will not waste time. I'll go do a CT scan along, waiting for the
Okay.
histology to come.
Okay. And a question, I think Dr. Azhar seems to be very aggressive on the surgical side. So,
No,
and
no,
a
no,
question
not like that.
specifically now for you,
Yeah.
would you do in early stage stomach when you're planning an upfront surgery for a patient with CS stomach for upfront? Now, the guidelines, at least the NCCN guidelines, the float data, everything supports that T2 and above. You go ahead and do chemotherapy first. Now, to be sure that the disease is less than that, you technically need an endoscopic ultrasound.
Right.
So a question there to surgeons and maybe even the medical oncologists, how do you decide that it's early disease on imaging, and whether would it be recommended that if the patient is being taken up for upfront surgery, one should do an endoscopic ultrasound beforehand? Dr. Azhar.
Yeah, so routine endoscopic ultrasound is advised in early disease, and very frankly, if you look at our data, our own data, you will find that less than 10% of your disease is kind of an early. Most of the time it is T2 and above. Now, the second question I will answer later on, maybe when you ask me that whether it
Okay.
is enough sufficient evidence to consider neoadjuvant therapy in all, because what NCCN say based on MAGIC or maybe FLOT does not compare neoadjuvant therapy versus upfront surgery. FLOT basically compares one modality of perioperative with another modality.
I think we'll come to that once we reach there. I think once we reach there, we'll talk about
US, in my opinion, I would consider when it is early disease, and if my endoscopists are very comfortable doing a endoscopic submucosal dissection or endoscopic mucosal dissection, or otherwise, if I'm planning to do some perigastric lymph node as a biopsy to decide my treatment plan.
So a quick word, Dr. Makarand or Dr. Piyush, about how happy you would be on your surgeons operating upfront without an endoscopic ultrasound, or you would really be a stickler there that no, you have to have a disease which is less than T2 for you to for the surgeon to operate.
Definitely, sir. I would like my surgeon to do an endoscopic ultrasound, but routinely find in our center also we don't do endoscopic ultrasound routinely. If
for a patient who is being taken up for upfront surgery, the question is specific.
Yeah, sorry.
The question is very specific for a patient being considered for upfront surgery. That's what we are talking about here. There.
Yeah. So if CT findings are suggestive and surgeons are willing for laparoscopic staging, then definitely okay.
Okay. And then we would go to the laparoscopy. There was a question in the chat box as well. I think in most of the panelists would agree that before giving neoadjuvant therapy, PET scan is not exactly a replacement for staging laparoscopy. It will miss lesions which are less than 5 mm on the liver, and peritoneal disease it is notorious to miss. So most of the panelists, I think, there would agree that staging laparoscopy, though logistically sometimes it's a challenge, it adds a cost to the treatment, it adds a procedure, some delay in treatment as well. Dr. Azhar, please.
Yeah. So I'm sorry to interrupt here. Actually,
no, perfectly fine.
When you said that there is a challenge, it is not a challenge, it's a very big challenge. it is not a practical strategy to consider staging laparoscopy and peritoneal wall cytology with the report will come after 48 hours and reconsider this patient for some sort of treatment. But ideally, believe me, staging laparoscopy do change management in more than
Yes, I totally agree.
25%. But unfortunately, with our setup, it is not practically feasible. That is
Practically
the
very, very difficult. Practically very, very difficult. And anybody been able to, I think even if we look at FLOT trial, even in the FLOT ECF as well as FLOT arm, their staging laparoscopy rates are somewhere around 40-41%. That's the figures that I remember. And so practically difficult to do. Yes, a very valuable investigation there. So this is what I think Dr. Azhar will have a lot of contention on that. To support him, I'll bring in the Japanese guidelines next. Most patients, loco-regional disease, you've got CT1B. The guidelines say, NCCN guidelines say surgery. T2 or higher, NEN, node negative, node positive, it says surgery or perioperative chemotherapy. And it says category 1 preferred or preoperative chemoradiation, which is category 2B. Now going forward, we have a very different guidelines coming from Japan, where what the Japanese are talking about is that unless you've got bulky nodes with clinical T2 or 2T4 disease, that is disease which is T2 to T4, but bulky nodes, anything less than that, they would consider surgery for that patient. And otherwise, they would consider neoadjuvant chemotherapy. So a very, very different approaches. West, they are talking about neoadjuvant even for T2 N0 disease. And in the East, they're talking about going up to maybe T3, T4, N1, maybe a little bit of N2, and considering surgery upfront for them rather than going for chemotherapy. I'm pretty sure both of them will have evidence on their sides, but supporting the Japanese side, the literature is less. We'll just go on to the questions and then. So this is a patient, 54-year-old lady, new onset dyspepsia, 3 months. Upper GI endoscopy showed an intral ulcer with everted margins. Biopsy was poorly differentiated adenocarcinoma. I don't know, in our practice now, doing a CT and then a PET CT, I don't know, it becomes very difficult to explain to the patient that why didn't we do the PET CT in the first go when we were to do it later. So
because the cost is a concern here, of course.
Yeah, you add a CT to that, and then if you got a good quality CT scanner with the PET, you get all the information that you would get from the CT anyway. So
Actually,
FDG AVID.
I think so. This debate on PET CT, and of course there is clear acknowledgement that PET CT would miss out on a large chunk of patients. But the fact of the thing is that PET CT, if in case most of the times in our practice we are ending up in most of our patients with the neoadjuvant strategy. So there, just to catch up looking for response rates in such patients, that is where probably PET CT as a single shot investigation is very important.
Yes, it helps. If you got a previous PET which shows SUV values which are less, you know that there is a response.
And sir,
so
the number of patients also, the number of patients which we see in, which we are talking about, T1 and T2. So the number of patients in these two groups compared to T3 and T4. So that also matters.
Yeah. So basically, if you go to strictly by the NCCN guidelines also, it says that you do a CT scan, and if the CT scan doesn't show metastatic disease, then you do a PET scan. So that's how the guidelines are placed. But then I don't know how practical it's like center to center, and there could be some variance. So you see antropyloric growth there, very few perilesional nodes there, and some element of food stasis in the stomach. Now, this patient, what would you do next? Staging laparoscopy, I think we have already discussed. Now, a question for Dr. Makarand as well as Dr. Amit. Routine practice of neoadjuvant chemotherapy in your center and experience with compliance and tolerance in Indian patients.
So, considering the in this case, 54-year-old lady, antral tumor and the perilesional nodes are positive, so definitely I would like to go with neoadjuvant chemotherapy. FLOT will be the choice because since last 3 to 4 years, there was some when FLOT came initially, there was definitely some hiccups regarding the use of FLOT. But in these years of experience, the side effect profile was definitely, as mentioned by Piyush sir, they are somewhat different with epirubicin containing regimens, but it is well tolerated and the response is definitely good.
Dr. Amit, you want to add something there?
Yeah. Like Dr. Azhar, I do have my issues with routine neoadjuvant chemotherapy in gastric cancer patients. But here in this patient particularly, I think she's got a gastric outlet obstruction. If I can see the CT scan.
She's got a partial gastric outlet obstruction. The vomiting hasn't been a major issue.
Yeah, but I think she will not tolerate her chemotherapy very well. Otherwise, I would want to
I think
subject
it's a
her
very
to
good consideration to mix, but since the patient does not have symptom of gastric artery obstruction and CT scan do have some stasis, that does not qualify for possibly GOO. But of course, I have reservation about routine float, as Dr. Makrand said, we'll discuss later on. But I think
Most of the times we end up, Dr. Azhar, with giving Folfox or a doublet first, and then we build up usually from the second,
this
third.
is, I think this bit I was coming to the next question. So you have a borderline patient with a not really that good a performance status. Age
Doublet is as
side.
good enough. Doublet is as good. A doublet is as good enough.
Now, we are going to come there next. Doublet, we don't have data for doublet actually. That's the problem with doublet.
So we have data for doublet. If you look at the NCCN preferred NCCN regimens,
yes,
NCCN
I'll come there.
I'll come there. Doublet.
I'll come there in the next. I think next or next to next slide.
So,
I'm coming there.
The French trial, what I showed the data, which actually debunked the epirubicin, did show that cisplatin and 5-FU are good enough. And most of the times in GI, we actually substitute cisplatin with oxaliplatin. So Folfox is one good regimen actually.
Okay, so we are talking about Folfox, and so in what proportion of patients, Dr. Piyush and Dr. Makarand, you would end up kind of starting with Folfox and then going on to be able to give float, or maybe not able to give float at all? Some ballpark figures there?
Sir, if the performance status is good and the patient, if we feel is a middle-aged and no other comorbidities, definitely we generally start with float only. And in cases if performance status is not good, so in that case means ECX and that we don't follow, and we directly start with Folfox or Capox.
Okay, so this is as per the guidelines as well, as Dr. Piyush was saying. Now coming to, I think we've had some debate here, or maybe we can just take it up right now. I think there won't be much time later for that as well. So patient is not a candidate for float. We see that the patient is a borderline patient, some issues with performance status, some comorbidities, some partial gastric outlet obstruction, and it is deemed that this patient is very difficult, is going to struggle through float. So Dr. Azhar and Dr. Amit, a word on surgery in this situation, then maybe you could here only talk about whatever your concerns are about giving neoadjuvant therapy to patients with something which is as per NCCN guidelines, T2 and 0 and above.
Okay, basically, if you are allowing me to cover this part, I would just say that when we talk about float, although it is very true that it is rapidly been adopted as a common protocol for management of CS stomach in our practice, agreed. But if you look at float, it does not answer neoadjuvant chemotherapy or perioperative chemotherapy versus upfront surgery. Now, if you look at the survival at float, you will find that survival is about 45%, 5 year. But if you look at D2 alone in the recent Italian gastric cancer study group, you will find that the 5-year survival is 63%. Now, if you go to Japanese S1 or the Korean Taiwanese multi-center trial, you will find that with proper D2 and adjuvant, they are attaining a survival of 71%. So one question is always apparent that rapidly adopting to float as a routine may be acceptable, but recommendation as must as a neoadjuvant chemotherapy or perioperative before CS stomach, I don't think it is a wise strategy. But coming to your question, like in this patient where the patient's general condition is not good to receive some sort of preoperative therapy, in that situation, of course, surgery will also be compromised. In that situation, as a surgeon, you will of course try to do the surgery with the intent start with an staging laparoscopy, and if it is doable, depending on your expertise, laparoscopic or open, you do gastrectomy, but be careful choosing a routine D2 gastrectomy in this situation, because still morbidity of D2 gastrectomy is not that low, and if the patient is borderline, we might end up into bigger problem.
Okay, Dr. Amit, you could also kind of we could address your concerns, or maybe we could hear your concerns with T2 and above philosophy in NCCN
I'll be just echoing what Dr. Azhar has told. See, the evidence that we have for perioperative chemotherapy these days is based on many studies. Okay, but they've been majorly influenced by the 2 big studies that came in early. Okay, so today, if you look at it, I think there are about 6 randomized trials which looked at these things, and only 3 had
Agreed. Yeah.
sort of looked at D2 lymphadenectomy.
Yeah.
Okay, and we look at these things. The rates of D2 lymphadenectomies have been very low in these trials. So what chemotherapy has taken is probably compensated for bad surgery.
Yeah,
Okay.
basically, Amit,
So-
to add to your thing,
Dr. Amit and Dr. Azhar, do you really think chemotherapy can compensate for bad surgery?
no,
Do
it's
do
not
you
a
really
thing,
think
it's
that?
the truth. It is the
Huh?
truth.
No, no.
Wherever chemotherapy is compensated, it is for bad surgery, whether it's magic trial. If you talk about, like Amit was saying about, I agree with Amit totally, that if you look at that 3 trial which have shown no benefit of proper D2, like the Italian trial by Biffy et al. And the German trial by Schumacher, there actually the overall survival have been not reported. And the third trial of D2 compliance, the D2 was actually 25%. So if you say that neoadjuvant chemotherapy is a way going forward, it is not true. The best question need to be asked in tumor board to the surgeon of the center, that are you D2 compliant? If your surgeon is D2 compliant, then yes, he has got an option of going upfront for surgery. As the Japanese guideline, Dr. Vivek, you just showed, I totally agree with that. But if the D2 compliance is not good, plot is a very decent regimen to apply to your patients.
Okay, so I
would
think
go with
Dr.
Japanese.
a quick word from Dr. Piyush and Dr. Makarand on neoadjuvant chemotherapy when a patient is not a candidate for FLOT. I think both of you would kind of, if the patient is not, you've already stated that out where you are going to try FOLFOX there and then see how the patient goes.
So definitely, if there is any gastric outlet obstruction, I mentioned in my presentation that any surgical emergency, gastric outlet obstruction
Agreed,
needs
yeah.
to go for surgery straight away. There is no doubt. But if in case this patient can eat and then there is no vomiting history, then of course one can start with FOLFOX and build upon, because there is data for doublet and of course towards FLOT. Now, one particular point, and what Dr. Azhar did mention, that FLOT of course was compared to another regimen, but that other regimen was compared to no regimen, and that was in the MAGIC and the FFCD also. So there we have data that if you do not give anything, definitely there is a additional, and FLOT is a further build up on that. Another one particular point is we must realize the importance of Will Rogers phenomena. If we are talking about various decades of medicine, we are not talking about medicine being practiced in one particular decade. There has been an evolution in surgery. There has been a revolution in chemotherapy strategies. So what if we start comparing a data set from 2000 to 2010 with the data set from 2011 to 2020 would not be a fair thing. So that is why you are not finding that FLOT is not being able to lift the curve above 45%, because this is one of the latest data set. If you compare it to some older data sets. That's what I'm trying to say.
No,
I think we could give one, Dr. Azhar and Dr. Amit, one chance each to a quick line to counter that.
No, I don't want to counter. I want to just participate in this. That FLOT is 2019 Albetron, and 5-year survival is 45%. Japanese, the Italian gastric cancer study of just D2. Just D2, properly conducted, 98% compliance with D2, the survival is 61%. We want survival. I think we agreed on this point that we want survival.
And this is, I think that to some extent, I think everybody would have to agree.
That is why I said, Vivek, that we need to answer ourselves, are we D2 compliant? And believe me,
Dr. Azhar, I would find it hard to believe that a significant proportion of people in our country as of today would be D2 compliant. I would think that, I believe things would be that way. No, D2 gastrectomy has been there for a long period of time now.
No, that is one thing. That is the belief. And second thing is, you just analyze your data, you will end up into knowing that 60% of your gastrectomies are actually D2. This is what I have done. That is what I'm saying. What happens sometimes, the patient is too frail to consider for D2 actually. And you actually think it is D2, but it's actually not D2. The number of lymph nodes are not. And then, of course, your pathologists do contribute to that. Sometimes the lymph nodes are not adequately analyzed. So end up into just compliance of 60 to 70%. So if you in your center analyze last 50 gastrectomy, 100 gastrectomy, if your surgeon is more than
our pathologists are very good. We may be bad surgeons, but our pathologists are phenomenal. So howsoever bad surgery,
We more
After the
possibly
bad
maybe bad
surgery we
surgeon
do,
as well.
they will somehow maybe make 3 out of 1 node or not. That's off the record. So basically, Dr. Piyush, I want you to counter that statement that when we are talking about neoadjuvant chemotherapy and FOLFOX in a borderline patient, we really do not have evidence for FOLFOX in the neoadjuvant setting. The data has largely been, I'll go to the next slide. If you see here, the same slide that you had put up, it says that fluoropyrimidine and oxaliplatin. And when we talk about the superscript, what it says is the use of this regimen and dosing schedules is based on extrapolations from published literature and clinical practices. And this is, most of this is actually from adjuvant setting or palliative setting, rather than there being a true trial between surgery, upfront surgery versus FOLFOX followed by surgery. Dr. Piyush, I want you to counter that.
Dr. Vivek, I mentioned that in our practice, when we look at certain situations like this, most of the time the neoadjuvant strategies, okay, when we say FOLFOX, we cannot deliver FLOT because of hypoalbuminemia. The first thing, whether would you be able to do a upfront surgery, or would you like the patient to be built up? You know, there's something from ovarian cancer, the fundamentals of same surgery from ovarian cancer. Now, talking about what we usually end up practicing is escalating towards FLOT. It is not just giving 3 or 4 cycles of FOLFOX. It is that you give some time, assess the biology as well as nutritional, build up on the nutritional status. The nutritional status slightly gets better, and then you build up on towards a triplet regimen. The whole idea is towards that. Definitely, you want to deliver. The intent is to deliver FLOT.
Yeah, the idea is very good, but the evidence for this idea is actually lacking. Would you accept that? The idea is fantastic. Yes, it makes sense. You're building up the patient, getting some chemotherapy.
There is evidence. See, there is evidence for cisplatin and 5-FU. If there is evidence for cisplatin and 5-FU, which is showing that, upon surgery, then I think so with FOLFOX also, there is no direct evidence. I admit that there is no direct evidence, but then oxaliplatin has, surpassed almost all the cisplatin regimens in stomach.
Yeah, that we agree. That I think we'll agree to that. So I think we'll somewhere along the line, we'll have to agree that yes, this is a sensible idea. That's how a significant, because if we talk about a very frail patient who wouldn't be a good surgical candidate, and a very fit patient who would be a good candidate for surgery as well as FLOT, you can do anything for that patient. There's a large subset of patients who are exactly in the middle of this. They're a bit really borderline. A patient, as you described, a frail patient, we wouldn't be happy taking up a surgery. Partial gastrectomy, you may even think that doing a GJ alone may be problematic. You may just place an NJ in that patient and feed that patient first. But then a lot of patients lie in between, and we really do not have the true answers, well-studied answers on these subsets of patients. We'll just come back to our patient. The same patient this patient actually received DOF outside, and I was told by my medical oncologist that it is almost similar to FLOT, except that the 5-FU duration is different. You want to add a word there between DOF and FLOT, Dr. Makaran?
Can be considered as an alternative, almost similar to FLOT. Basically, we just the leucovorin is eliminated. So what we can say, the enhanced effect of the 5-FU. It's just like the addition of docetaxel to the FOLFOX regimen.
But I believe the 5-FU dosage is also very high in FLOT. I think it's 2,600.
I think so. DOF is a 21-day regimen. If I remember, 21 day with a 46-hour infusion.
Yeah, I think that's the difference. The duration of 5-FU infusion and the duration is different. That's the
dosage
difference.
Also.
Dosage, I'm not sure. Dosage, Dr. Piyush, would you be able to comment on that?
I do not remember the dosing of DOF because I'm not practicing.
We are not using
DOF
it.
much.
Okay, so this patient then had a PET CT which showed, as we can see, good response on the PET, reduction in SUV value, some reduction in thickening, some reduction in the size of nodes seen there. You do a restaging PET in a patient who've given neoadjuvant therapy. I think most people would agree, even if there is some bit of progression, but the disease is unresectable, then obviously there is no question. You would just give up on resection and think of what you can do next. Maybe think of palliative chemoradiation or something like that. There is some progression, but the disease is resectable. Dr. Piyush and Dr. Amit and Dr. Makaran there. What would be your thought process on this patient who's progressed a bit, but still has a resectable disease?
Yeah, in this case, I think surgeon would like to, if it is a resectable disease, surgeon would definitely like to resect the disease.
Now, what would you
But-
like?
Yeah, post, no, I also would advocate for resection, but the main question comes after the resection, what? Because in the new
We'll come to that. We'll come to that in the next slide or so maybe. So if there is progression but resectable disease, Dr. Amit, you would agree you would go for surgery here as well?
Yes, there's no other choice but to go for surgery.
Yeah.
Okay, but
The same,
but I
would
think
Surgery,
Dr. Azan and
yes.
Piyush agree on the same strategy? If there
Surgery.
was a bulky nodal disease to start with, it is still resectable, but there is limited or no regression, and there is bulky node disease. Considering what Dr. Piyush said about them actually not being gatekeepers, the lymph nodes not being gatekeepers, but rather kind of showing us that probably the disease is much more than what could be
Only
probably.
thing to add, Vivek, here is that if the disease have limited or no regression, that goes to prove that the response to therapy itself is a biomarker of tumor biology. It shows that if the response is good, overall outcome is going to be good. In that situation, of course, there is no option than to try to resect by staging laparoscopy followed by try to resect it. But yes, the outcome will be inferior compared to where there have been some response to therapy.
Yeah. Dr. Piyush, any difference of opinion there?
No, I absolutely agree that, there are situations in medicine where, and especially in oncology, that we have decided, once we have decided a plan and the disease remains operable, we need to complete the plan, explaining to the family or patient that, the outcomes might not be great, but then this is what we have to do. Any day it would be better than not doing it, anything.
Yeah. So I think herein, I think this is one slide where we have a lot of consensus that if there is progression or there is limited response, irrespective of the bulk of disease, most of us would agree to performing surgery for this patient. So a word on open lab robotic, your individual preferences, Dr. Azhar, Dr. Amit, for gastric cancer.
Dr. Amit, if you want to go ahead, please.
no, I think minimal invasive way is the good way to go for it. And I do a lot of my surgeries laparoscopically, and that's what I believe in. The magnification, I think we get a better yield, and the blood loss is much lesser than what we do in open surgery. The pain and the recovery is also faster. So laparoscopically, yes, we do not have a robot, but I think we could replicate the same issues with robotic surgery. I think, but what literature says is that the operative times are higher, and of course the question of costs which are there.
So, Dr. Azhar, you want to add something there?
Yeah. Only thing is, I agree with Amit. With some evidence, if you talk about laparoscopy and open, there are 4 subsets to describe, like early gastric cancer or advanced gastric cancer. Second subset to describe is distal gastrectomy or distal subtotal gastrectomy versus total gastrectomy. Laparoscopy for total gastrectomy, right now the data is lacking. Now for distal gastrectomy, for early gastric cancer, we have good short-term and long-term data on both short-term and long-term oncological outcome, apart from that feasibility and safety, 3-year and 5-year results. So for distal gastrectomy, early gastric cancer, depending on the expertise, laparoscopy is as good as open. Regarding advanced gastric cancer, except bulky nodal disease, yes, there is some consensus, but there is short-term data on disease-free survival and overall outcomes supporting laparoscopy as non-inferior compared to open modality. So if you have a expertise available for laparoscopic, distal gastrectomy, D2, non-bulky nodal disease, it is an ideal treatment modality. Regarding robotic, largely these are retrospective trial. Mostly they are compared with open gastrectomy, because randomization of robotic or laparoscopic or open is sometimes will be ethically a concern unless the cost issue has not been settled, and it has shown that robotic increases operative time and increases the cost.
Yeah, I would agree to both a lot of what Dr. Amit and Dr. Azhar had said. I've just mentioned these 3 trials. The Korean trial was early gastric cancers alone. So we leave that aside. But as regards the data for bulky nodal disease, and this is concerned about, talked about bulky nodal disease and advanced gastric cancer. So I think the Japanese, the first trial is a Japanese trial in which there are about 1,000+ patients where they have taken all comers. Basically, there are T4N+ disease as well there. And at the same time, I would say that even my preference is that if there is a tumor which is going close to the G junction, where my issue is going to be with the margin at the G junction, where it's going to make a whole lot of a difference whether we'll be able to do the anastomosis comfortably laparoscopically or not. That is
Yes.
one area where I would definitely go towards the open side. Otherwise, in most patients, even with the proximal body tumor, but if the G junction is free and there is some margin there clearly, then I think a lap or an open procedure does the same. As Dr. Azhar rightly pointed out, most literature talks about non-inferiority of laparoscopy over open surgery in terms of oncological outcomes. But essentially, that means for the audience is that it has never been shown to be superior in terms of oncological outcomes.
Right.
It scores in terms of the cosmetic outcomes, the earlier recovery, the pain scores, and the wound complication rates later on. So it's non-inferiority and not oncological superiority when we are talking about laparoscopy for gastric cancer. So this patient had a histopathology which showed that there was an adenocarcinoma diffuse type, and this is where Dr. Makarand we are coming to. There were poorly differentiated tumor G3. The margins fortunately are free. 1 out of 21 nodes positive. YP, T3, N1, M0. To our surprise, even though there was FDG, there was significant reduction in SUV values, even the bulk of tumor on the imaging. The pathologist said that there was very little response to chemotherapy. And this is, I don't know, this is what we have been discussing in our tumor board quite often. And I would like to have an actually opinion from all four of you as to what has been your experience. Has it been similar or it's been different in terms of there being quite a lot of disconcordance between histopathological responses compared to the radiological responses?
Vivek, one thing I just would like to add regarding the response to treatment. Unfortunately, we don't have a single investigation which you can rely on. So if you say that radiological response,
the pathology is the king there, no?
Pardon?
The pathologist is the king there, no?
Yeah, no, it's not about that. The pathologists have eventually the final say because they have evaluated the tissue. But unfortunately, like SUV value, just you mentioned in PET scan, sometimes it can be misleading, unfortunately. And second is,
if you combine, no, Dr. Azhar, I'll just differ there. If you combine, if you say by RECIST criteria, you're talking about that there is a reduction in the thickening on the CT, as well as there is reduction in the SUV value on the primary tumor and the nodes. You would say this is a clinical radiological response. And the patient's clinical symptoms have also improved at the same time.
The confidence interval is not that high.
Okay.
We can say with the confidence level maybe 70% that I'm correct, because the radiological response does not correlate with histological response.
Yeah, this is what my observation was as well. Dr. Piyush, Dr. Makarand, you would like to add something there?
You have a diffuse type adenocarcinoma which is poorly differentiated.
Yeah.
In such a histology, basically you cannot rely much on PET CT finding. Of course, there you might end up with a discordance. But of course, I agree with you that there is definitely not what you see on the PET CT and what you end up seeing on the table. I mean, pathology lab. There would definitely be not that sort of PCRs that you would want to see. So definitely there is a huge discordance.
So where we end up having the issue is when you are facing the patient. You've told them that there was a very good response on the PET when you took them up for surgery. And then when the final histopathology comes, then you're talking a very different tune. That the disease there.
So the whole thing we have to probably again look at stomach is the lot of heterogeneity that this tumor has. It is not one tumor. It is probably some signet as well, and then some intestinal as well. So we really cannot end up commenting in particular until unless we absolutely define, PET in one histology. Okay, for intestinal, PET is wonderful, but for we have not defined that. So,
and Vivek, what is the difference we see is the kind of radiological and pathological discordance is far less in CA esophagus. In CA esophagus,
agreed.
Say good response. Overall histology also agrees on that, but in stomach, I agree with Dr. Piyush that I agree with the different histology have a different response.
In fact, Dr. Azhar just now mentioned this, and it just reminded me of the Municon trial where PET CT is actually being looked into changing the treatment patterns of CA esophagus, whereas in CA stomach, we do not know.
It's not. Agreed.
So this is what essentially the tumor regression on HP is. And the question for Dr. Piyush and Dr. Makaran, you've given FLOT first as preoperative therapy in these patients, and your tumor regression score is 3. That is, there is extensive residual cancer with no evident tumor regression. How would you approach your patient with this report in hand and plan the further therapy?
In case of neoadjuvant therapy and tumor regression score of 3, definitely it's proven that that particular chemotherapy won't be working in a adjuvant setting, and no point in giving that. But the trials and the studies had shown that even if you change the chemotherapy, the results are not so great. So one of the option is we can give is to as node positivity is there, that we can change it to CTRT. But in spite of that, like extrapolating the data of the critics trial, still the result will be not so great, or can be conclusively said. So depends. But I would, in this case, I would definitely like to change the chemotherapy.
So change it to what?
Say
You've already given a triplet of FLOT. So changing chemotherapy means changing to what? Once you've given FLOT preoperatively, your options are really limited in terms of changing postoperatively with just the chemotherapy. There, the only thing that you can add is chemoradiation. No.
Chemoradiation.
I would like you to add something there.
So again, we really do not have robust data for radiation, but yes, individual patient discussion is very important. That heavy nodal burden, if it is there, then we can discuss about radiotherapy. Again, the center where this is all being practiced and discussed is important. And also, if we look at, if we end up giving completing FLOT, that also we have to accept that, you are dealing with a bad disease pattern eventually.
Yeah. And
Okay.
so I think another, yeah, Dr. Amit.
Just a little comment. Maybe this is a case where we should do MSI testing, and wherein he's not responding to chemotherapy.
So maybe I was coming to there, rather than MSI testing, what we have discussed in our tumor board sometimes has been that maybe NCCN recommends doing the HER2/neu testing in all patients, and probably, but some suggestion has come that we could do HER2/neu at least at this point in time, and to the FLOT maybe add HER2 trastuzumab, and considering, I think I'm going to come to that as well. So coming to, before we discuss about that, the surgeons in the group, upfront surgery, when would you, I think both of you are quite, like, you would consider upfront surgery in a significant proportion more of patients than what the NCCN guidelines would recommend. But bleeding would be definitely one indication where most of us would agree that if a patient is requiring transfusions, then probably doing surgery first. If the performance status is not that, patient is reasonably okay to consider surgery first. Gastric outlet obstruction would also become a relative indication for doing an upfront surgery. Dr. Piyush and Dr. Makaran, would you go to the extent of putting in an NJ tube and giving these patients neoadjuvant chemotherapy?
For gastric outlet obstruction?
Yes.
I would prefer that the patient should be operated first in cases of
Okay. And Dr. Piyush?
Likewise, yeah.
Okay, great. And I think any other situation has already been answered earlier. There would be a lot of situations where some surgeons would prefer to operate. And
Dr. Vivek, can I ask one thing?
Yeah, Dr. Shefali, please.
So would you consider how significant is the obstruction, or just gastric outlet obstruction and you go and operate? So what is all panelists' take on that? So relevant to your question of putting an NJ tube and...
Yeah. See, some bit of this we have already discussed. In a patient who's not really throwing up and is tolerating reasonable amount of food, you could do a calorie count on that patient and see what's happening there. In that patient, you could probably just go ahead and feed. There could be a situation where you've got a really bulky nodal disease as well thrown in, where the surgeon would feel that rather than the surgeon, it's the entire group feeling that probably it might be better idea to put in a NJ, feed this patient, give some chemotherapy, and then take this patient up for surgery. But a lot of patients would be somewhere in between.
Antral stent also, Vivek.
Antral stents are also there, yes.
Antral stents also.
The problem with the antral stent is that you put an antral stent, and when you are doing your gastrectomy, you are pulling out the stent, and you are really closing up a very nasty duodenal stump, especially if you're doing a distal, or even if you're doing a dual gastrectomy. Yes. Very, very tricky situation. I don't know. I've just operated once, and it was enough to tell me that post antral stenting doing a gastrectomy is not a good job somehow. you are really worried about that duodenal stump. It's
Yeah.
really stretched out, looks very edematous when you're closing it. You can't fire a stapler. You have to pull out the stent first and then close the duodenal stump.
So I
So
will only choose if the patient have grossly, excessively bulky disease where surgical arterial resection is not possible, then of course I will try enteral stent. Otherwise, of course, I will go for front surgery in this situation.
yeah. So Dr. Shefali, I hope we've got an opinion of all the 4 panelists there already on that.
Absolutely, absolutely. Right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So Dr. Azhar and Dr. Amit, and maybe the rest can pitch in as well. When we talk of neoadjuvant chemotherapy and post-operative complications, as Dr. Azhar already pointed out, due to gastrectomy, you do see complications. And if we actually look at the FLOT trial, the median hospital stay is 15 versus 16 days. I'm pretty sure Dr. Azhar and Amit, I think there is a significant proportion of patients who've undergone an Ivor Lewis esophageectomy in the FLOT versus in the FLOT trial. Probably that is also skewing the results. But
Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
on the average, our median hospital stay for a gastrectomy, any form, subtotal would be lesser, a total would be about 7 days. A median stay would be about 7 to 8 days. Most of us would agree, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
And do you see any change in complication? And as I understand, both Dr. Amit and Dr. Azhar, you do a lot of patients who have not received preoperative chemotherapy. So do you really see any difference in the recoveries in the postoperative period in terms of their morbidity, in terms of maybe mortality is a very figure where which is so low
Yeah.
that it will be difficult to pick up a difference, but some complications which you see much more often, or overall
if I
complication
just-
rate you see higher?
Yeah, if I share my experience post-FLOT, the tissue look really charred. Response is really good, but surgery become actually difficult. Now, regarding gastrectomy in terms of D2, our hospital stay is pretty standard. We have not seen much because routinely we are doing D2. But yes, following neoadjuvant therapy, I am little worried, particularly if it is FLOT. And if you look at the tissue really look kind of almost charred and look like a lot of fibrotic reactions already happened. Although it is believed that without radiation, there is no fibrosis. I disagree. With a good FLOT and a good response, tissue does.
Wherever you see good response, you will see some fibrosis.
Yes.
Because I think that's what the tumor tissue gets replaced with. Dr. Amit, any difference in complications when no neoadjuvant and neoadjuvant that you see? Any particular complication you are worried about or you see more frequently?
I think organ-space infections definitely have been higher, okay, in my experience. Okay, and my confidence in initiating orals and progressing the patient and trying to discharge him early is slightly less when the patient has undergone a neoadjuvant chemotherapy than it would be for a patient have taken for a upfront surgery. So
Yeah,
that
I think that's a very
my-
valid point there. When we would be very happy to, in a patient who's not received neoadjuvant therapy, would be happy to escalate ERAS, everything. But when it comes down to a patient who received neoadjuvant chemotherapy, you end up starting with slightly higher antibiotic, you slightly going slow, patient vomits one day, you go back 2 days. And so their management goes, and probably we haven't really analyzed that, but the hospital stay would tend to be a bit longer when you are,
Yeah.
and probably that is also what reflects in this ECF versus FLOT, because both sides patient, both groups patients received neoadjuvant chemotherapy. So this will increase the hospital stay, and increase in hospital stay directly reflects into an increase in the cost as well. And the mortality as far as FLOT versus ECF is concerned is no different in the FLOT trial. Now coming to another question, say you pick up a limited peritoneal disease on staging laparoscopy. What would be your individual take? We'll start from Dr. Azhar and go to Dr. Piyush. Dr. Azhar, you see a very limited disease on the staging laparoscopy, and you had planned, say for example, you had planned neoadjuvant therapy for this patient.
Yeah.
Before doing the staging laparoscopy, what would be your take at this point in time?
First is, of course, no palliation, of course, neoadjuvant therapy to consider and see the response to treatment. If the response is good, and then if the patient is in good performance status, ECOG 0 and 1, can consider for palliative only distal subtotal, not total gastrectomy, because I don't think total gastrectomy should be considered palliative. And if there is no response, explain to the patient that it is better to consider for systemic therapy because overall outcome is maybe slightly better than systemic metastasis, but it is not overall good.
So Dr. Makaran, what would be your take in this patient?
Yeah, any limited peritoneal disease, definitely one chance needs to be given. So it will be a neoadjuvant therapy. But considering gastric cancer, mostly coldly differentiated and the subset, the disease and the further results of CRS HIPEC after that and the cytoreductive surgery required. So per se also, even after neoadjuvant therapy, the results are not so good. And if upfront after neoadjuvant therapy, the response is not good, definitely we'll turn it to the palliative treatment.
So say if your response is good and there was only limited peritoneal disease, say just a few mental deposits on the pre-operative stage, on the pre-therapy staging laparoscopy, would you want your surgeon to put in a scope again? Yeah, Dr. Azhar.
Mental deposits and peritoneal deposits might differ in terms of biology of the disease for CS stomach.
So we
If
take
you're
it.
talking about peritoneal disease, it is more sinister.
Yeah, or mental disease, unless it is contiguous,
Yeah,
would essentially reflect a systemic spread in the abdomen as well.
but still
So-
it can be part of an R0 if it is possible and good response after.
So the same thing,
neoadjuvant.
say if you have maybe 3 or 4 small tiny deposits, it was a proximal gastric cancer, just a few 3 or 4 deposits on the diaphragmatic peritoneum. That would also be kind of a similar thing. So
Yeah,
the
I
philosophy
agree.
should remain the same both by and large on both.
Yeah.
Dr. Amit? I think we've lost connection with Dr. Amit. Dr. Piyush?
As long as the surgeon is going to take it out, I think so. We follow the oligometastatic protocols in most of cancer subsets. So I think so. We take a cue from there, and neoadjuvant should be delivered. I mean, with the intent of neoadjuvant. Eventually, it turns out to be palliative. That's another thing. But
And so at the end of this
intent would be-
neoadjuvant, you would like your surgeon to go in, put a scope again and see if there is limited disease again to go ahead with surgery, right?
Of course, I mean, it's the disease being discovered on laparoscopy, so the scope would again be put before the surgeon would go in for.
Yeah, agreed. And if the disease is still
That will also
limited,
be prognostic, and that will help the medical oncologist to choose for a systemic therapy
No.
as well.
the intent at this point in time at surgery would be to take it out or just for prognosis?
Staging laparoscopy will help you in prognostication, and if staging laparoscopy shows limited disease, you can go ahead with palliative
Yeah.
distal subtotal gastrectomy. Regarding, like Dr. Amit was saying, or
No,
Dr. Makan was saying,
somehow the issue there is with using that word palliative there somewhere. I have a personal issue with using that word there with limited peritoneal disease. I'm going to show you some data for that. Now, this is something which has been published in literature as well. When you consider, obviously, there is no systemic chemotherapy arm alone here. So that's a limitation of whatever data we have. But then we have patients with peritoneal disease, obviously low PCI disease, and that's why I put very limited peritoneal disease, where you can do a relatively complete cytoreduction. That CRS alone probably is not working that well. But when we talk about CRS and HIPEC, we have patients who are getting 20. This may be a very, very selected group of patients. But these patients are getting some 5-year survival, some good 3-year survivals, and probably that is where I had an objection to the word using palliative there. Probably if I would go in this patient, Dr. Amit, you want to add something there? You would go like the whole way, or you would consider something like a palliative approach as Dr. Azhar recommended? We've lost connection again with Dr. Amit, looks like. So I think there would be a difference of opinion there. We can have Dr. Amit saying about it again, but then low peritoneal carcinomatosis index with likelihood of a CC0 or a CC1 resection and combining it with HIPEC has shown some promising results. They may not be very, very kind of extendable to a large cohort of patients, but definitely it is encouraging in terms of being used as a strategy in patients with limited peritoneal disease.
Yeah, Vivek, I have just one difference in this evidence. Majority of these trials, if you look, they are a very small volume studies, a small cohort of patients, a small number of patients.
If I'm not wrong, the first one that I put it here had about 80 patients, 40 each arm. And I'm Dr. Piyush, systemic therapy alone for peritoneal disease and gastric cancer. What would be the 5-year survivals like? Would you see 5-year survivals?
Something below 45%, of course.
No.
Yeah.
No. Peritoneal disease, systemic therapy alone. Gastric cancer, systemic therapy alone for peritoneal disease.
Oh, that would be
very poor.
Yeah, very
6
poor.
to 9 months. Maybe.
Yeah. So 6 to 9 months. So when we talk about some evidence, yes, I agree. These patients would be small studies, very selected group of patients, but then in a patient who's got good performance status, a very, very limited.
I agree. Yeah, I agree.
very low PCI disease, probably it could be considered. Yes, you would at the same time counsel the patient that yes, the long-term outcomes aren't really going to be that great, but then we talk about gastric cancer, we see the flawed results, and otherwise as well, most of the literature does seem to say that the surgery results aren't that great. So, Dr. Ash, I would like Dr.
Dr.
Ashutosh.
Vivek, one more
Dr.
comment, please, if you
Yeah.
allow.
Yeah,
So
yeah, please.
there are two things about it. So once you talk of the limited peritoneal disease, would that histology matters to you once making a decision for CRS and HIPEC? Number one. Number second, now once in this setting, if you tend to use immunotherapies once you have that metastatic disease to peritoneum, so would that change your decision in considering CRS HIPEC versus using the chemo combination once patient has a high CPS scoring? Though there is no
I think you would be the
comparison
best person to
available.
answer that question yourself, because we will look back to you and
So it's
for you
open
to
to
answer
all.
this question
It's
for us.
open to all whosoever.
No, I would first like to
Yeah.
have your opinion on this.
So my opinion is, I mean, though it is not comparable, yet not compared in any of the studies, immunotherapy is just incorporated in the metastatic setting. However, I would agree if we choose and select our patients like intestinal histology, not a diffuse signet ring cell type, or a limited 1 or 2 nodules in the omentoperitoneum, good performance status, young patients, I would agree with you. Otherwise, other factors on the other side of the table, I would little limit myself if I see the peritoneal disease on staging laparoscopy. So that is my take on it. So others' opinion, I would welcome.
Dr. Piyush?
I feel that I think so best of all modalities should be used. Now, when I say that, I mean to say that if Dr. Vivek would consider a HIPEC over there, irrespective of whatever the histology be, I think so HIPEC and surgery should be used, because eventually you need to lift up the survival curves, whether you use immunotherapy or so. As in, we say that you need to position every drug in a bad disease. Likewise, I would like to position every modality, if possible, whether it be HIPEC and probably down the line immunotherapy once the disease is metastatic. For now, that is the data. So that is what I would say.
So I think somewhere along the line, if I just go back one slide, we see that in these studies on CRS and HIPEC, there were some independent predictors which said that if there was synchronous peritoneal disease, if there was CC01, there was systemic chemotherapy received prior to the surgery for more than 6 cycles. I don't know what therapy has been used, and no serious adverse events after the surgery. These were things which predicted the survival, and probably we could use this information subsequently, factor in this information when we are planning a patient beforehand as well. So that's why if there is extensive disease, high PCI, low likelihood of CC0, CC1, then probably there wouldn't be any benefit, and probably that's where you would back out. So you would counsel the patient beforehand that staging laparoscopy, we find extensive disease, then we will just back out. We're not going to try a CRS and HIPEC. Bad disease, but an extensive disease, not likely to do too well with HIPEC and cytoreduction, you would rather back out than kind of go all guns blazing in this situation as well. So I had asked Dr. Ashutosh to prepare a few slides. I scrolled the slides for him, and we are sorry, Dr. Ashutosh, for boring you out. I hope you are there. So we'll let Dr. Ashutosh talk about some new light on, or some additional light on, the current status of neoadjuvant chemoradiotherapy or radiation in gastric cancer. Dr. Ashutosh, please.
So thank you, Dr. Vivek. I have been listening into this lively discussion. Am I audible?
Yes, yes, we can hear you.
Yeah. So there would be 1 or 2 instances where I would throw in the cat among the pigeons. We'll have a little controversy. So firstly, I would like to point out one thing, that there is a difference in data coming in from the West and from the East. Now, the Japanese and the Koreans have been predominant in their data about D2 lymphadenectomies, and the fact that they do not include neoadjuvant chemo or chemoradiation in their treatment protocols in early stage operable or non-borderline easily resectable tumors. So this, one of the reasons given is they have a good screening program. The other country we must look to is China. China right now accounts for nearly half of all stomach cancer cases and half of all deaths. And it is one country where you could say the screening program is not very stringent. So a more equitable or a more complete picture could be seen from studying a lot of Chinese publications. Now, coming to the neoadjuvant or even in the adjuvant settings in CS stomach. Now, I am not a great fan of the ARTIST paper, either ARTIST 1 or ARTIST 2, for the simple reason, as Dr. Piyush had said sometime before, it's comparing apples with oranges. While the chemotherapy arm has evolved with time in the ARTIST paper, the radiation arm has remained stagnant. The technique used was a two-dimensional antero-posterior field, which would add to the toxicities and hence the low survival rates. If I would like to compare, I would go to see the Chinese data, especially there was a phase 2 data by Zhu et al. Who compared IMRT with chemo, and across the board, there were near significant and significant improvements. So, but since that is not an RCT, we cannot bring it on the same level as ARTIST. Now, coming to the neoadjuvant setting, one of the earliest papers on neoadjuvant chemoradiation in locally advanced gastric cancers was by Roth et al. From Switzerland, where they used 3 different radiation doses below, 38 gray and above, between 30 and 38 gray, and below 38 gray, below 30 gray. And what they found was the best responses were seen at around 38 gray, so between 38 to 40 gray. So that was what they quantified as the at that time the optimum dose of radiation required to bring about a good regression in disease, to allow for a better surgery and to take care of micrometastasis. If you could go to the next slide, Dr. Vivek. Yeah, so this graph shows the overall survival. In this study, only 19 patients were accrued and 18 completed their neoadjuvant therapy. Majority of the patients had grade 3 and 4 toxicities. So that is, we accept that. And this being an old paper, the technique of radiation would have been by antero-posterior fields and not by the more modern techniques. So the 2-year and 3-year relapse-free survivals were of the order of 57 and 50%. And the most frequent site of relapse was the peritoneum. And this has been seen even in the MAGIC trial, in the intergroup trial, and in the ARTIST trial, where between 25 to 33%. So between a quarter to 1/3 of patients at 3 years relapsed in the peritoneum. So that could be itself one point of discussion, that should we treat the entire peritoneal cavity in locally advanced gastric cancers? I mean, that question has never been asked, and I don't think it has ever been discussed also. So any points
that would be difficult to answer as well. Irradiating the whole abdominal cavity is going to be a huge challenge as well.
No, I'm not saying irradiating. I'm not saying irradiating. I'm saying treating.
Okay.
See, a large portion of our patients are going to relapse in the peritoneum. All the trials have shown it. So that is one point maybe for future research.
Yeah, and I think this is somewhere where probably some of the papers are talking about prophylactic HIPEC in absence of obvious peritoneal disease for T4 cancers, and there is some Japanese literature on this which is supporting this. And that's a very valid point that Dr. Ashutosh has brought out, that a significant proportion of failures of treatment in gastric cancer occur in the peritoneal cavity, and probably this is one area where we need to address it much more than we are thinking about it or really trying to address it that much, because you see it a significant common cause of death after gastric cancer surgery is obstruction, and we also see a fair bit proportion of that in our practice as well. So Dr. Ashutosh, shall I go to the next slide?
Yes, yes, Dr. Vivek, please, please, thank you. So then there was this analysis, the National Cancer Database analysis from the US, where they evaluated more than 4,000 patients, and they found that giving neoadjuvant chemoradiation resulted in higher PCR and R0 rates than neoadjuvant chemo alone. And this, they did a multivariate as well as a univariate analysis, and they found that adding radiation increased increased the PCR and the R0 rates. However, there was no specific relation to improvement in survival or in morbidity or mortality rates. So that, yes, there is that is the weak point in neoadjuvant chemoradiation, that it results in increased levels of GI and blood toxicities. Next slide, please. So this slide shows the various studies. A lot of studies have been done. Initially, many of them retrospective. Now, a few of them prospective. The weak point of many of these trials is that the older ones had a significant number of their patients in the G junction. So I think that data I would rather compile with esophagus and G junction tumors than bring it down into stomach. And finally, the last slide I would, next slide, yeah. So this slide I would show is, while the Japanese and the Koreans have not given any recommendation for neoadjuvant chemoradiation because they have a very robust screening program, it is the Chinese who have given indications for neoadjuvant chemoradiation as well as NCCN, and both these guidelines agree on adding neoadjuvant chemoradiation in case of disease more than T2 with node positivity, and they all agree for a dose around 40 to 45 gray. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ashutosh, for a very elaborate thing about I think a lot of it is about limitations in the fact that it has really not been studied that well, and whenever limited time it has been used, probably sometimes the technology was old and probably the case selection was not there that well, but somewhere along the line in the neoadjuvant setting, probably it is being, as Dr. Piyush also rightly pointed out, the Top Gear trial is actually looking at that, and probably its results should make us some bit wiser about how much benefit the radiation is going to add in terms of when it's given neoadjuvant.
So yes, Dr. Vivek, actually in the adjuvant setting, we all hoped that the ARTIST trial would answer a lot of questions, but if I look closely at the ARTIST trial, the technique does not match between the two arms. The technique for radiation is much older, leaves much to be desired.
Okay.
It is
so
we are relatively now on the Top Gear.
Is a relatively newer trial, so hopefully the radiation techniques there would be a little more up to date and probably more usable in current scenario, and that's the only thing that we can hope for now. So Dr. Piyush and Dr. Makarand, targeted therapy in neoadjuvant setting, any experiences?
Not used till now, but multiple trials are going on, majority with HER2 positivity, as mentioned by Piyush sir, that Pertacatile is compared FLOT along with trastuzumab and pertuzumab, and one more trial is going for HER2 setting only, comparing trastuzumab with one of the chemotherapy. I don't remember right now, but yeah, the results are awaited.
Yeah. So as rightly
pointed out, so one point again to make upon, so this trial is very impressive, combining trastuzumab and immunotherapy with FOLFOX based regimen. So overall response rate 74%, though I agree this is in the metastatic setting. I don't know whether they would like to try it in the neoadjuvant setting also, considering wonderful response rate. So any comment, Dr. Makarand, Dr. Piyush on that?
This is an abstract which was presented at ASCO. It was published in 2020 Journal Clinical Oncology. As Dr. Makarand also pointed out, some increased PCRs there, 35 versus 12%. And I think one thing which I found impressive was the increased incidence of node negative resections. And I think somewhere along the line, a node negative resection would give us a lot more kind of a thing that, yes, we are probably being able to add something there. and it did increase the morbidity and mortality, although there was slightly increased toxicity on using the targeted therapy in the neoadjuvant setting. Petrarca actually combined FLOT with the HER2/neu targeted therapy, I think.
Right.
And
And
this is one.
Dr. Vivek, we are very skeptical about even after D2 dissection once we have a high nodal burden. Some of us still argue even
Yes.
after D2 dissection, okay, is there any quantum of benefit adding radiation there? So I think if we achieve that node negative
With this.
resection, that would be something wonderful to have it.
Yes.
Yeah.
And probably somewhere along the line in the adjuvant setting, probably over a period of time, at least in the subset of patients in whom the chemotherapy responses haven't been that great, this would have some role probably. I think we should be wiser in the next 5-10 years, but then this should have some role there, adding some benefit to these patients when there hasn't really been a too great a response to neoadjuvant chemotherapy.
Only
So-
thing is finding the biomarker. HER2 has always been, a very bad biomarker for gastric cancer as compared to
Okay.
breast, where it is very pure. And the heterogeneity is so much that even in metastatic TOGA sort of setting, we really do not get those sort of responses as well as survivals, what we expect with the TOGA sort of results. Sometimes we do get in intestinal
So that
histology.
the
Yeah.
issue there is because the tumor is not HER2/neu positive, or there is a lack of response
Despite-
even when HER2/neu positive.
Even if it is HER2/neu, I'm talking only even if it is HER2/neu, there is so much of heterogeneity that you might
Okay.
still not
Okay.
get the.
Okay, that's interesting because this trials that kind of responses that you would expect with that.
Yeah, so that's why they are now looking at building upon trastuzumab. Trastuzumab alone might not be the answer in neoadjuvant. Building upon trastuzumab like pertuzumab and lapatinib. Lapatinib failed, TDM1 failed. So probably it's a phase 2, stopped early. So let's see. I mean, yeah, this looks encouraging, but let's see.
This looked to me, this was new information and this looked very encouraging.
Yeah,
So
only
was
thing
like,
is
this is
it
something we are
becomes
going to-
more interesting if you have trastuzumab at 18,000 now, and pertuzumab is also available at quite a similar price, then it becomes more interesting.
Okay, great. That's new knowledge. So we've talked a lot about neoadjuvant therapy there, and this is where Dr. Azhar would like this slide. Somewhere along the line, we also have to see the kind of survivals that the different parts of the world are seeing with just surgery or adding some chemotherapy. Now, this is Prodigy, a Korean trial, surgery followed by S1 versus docetaxel of oxaliplatin and S1 plus surgery, followed by surgery. And you see the survivals. This is way far better than what we see. And this is probably where he was talking about that Italian trial as well, that there is probably a lot of heterogeneous diseases that we are talking about as of now. And our knowledge, and as I would quote Barack Obama here, we have to acknowledge the progress we've made, but still we have a long way to go. The things are better, but still not good enough. And we have to do a lot more in this field for our patients. I thank all the panelists, Dr. Shefali, for the opportunity, and all the panelists for a very healthy discussion. We'll take up some of the questions from the panel. There are some comments as well. I'll just keep going down. So
So Dr. Vivek, most of the things you have covered, I can only see this role of gastrojejunostomy in gastric outlet obstruction in patient planned for NACT. So probably
So,
this is
I
not
think-
answered till now.
So somewhere along the line, I'll take the liberty of answering this question myself. When we are talking of a palliative setting,
Please.
then probably doing a gastrojejunostomy is a good idea before, because it definitely tends to give much better longevity of the bypass compared to an enteral stent. When we're talking of a neoadjuvant setting, probably putting in an NJ tube should suffice. As of now, I wouldn't go to the extent of putting an enteral stent, because that makes, as a surgeon, it makes my life hell of a difficult when I'm dividing the duodenum, hell scared for that duodenal stump. And you have a duodenal stump leak, it really troubles you. So I hope that answers that question adequately. So if in a palliative setting, yes, unless there is very extensive peritoneal disease, say a patient has liver disease or very limited peritoneal disease, then I would consider a gastrojejunostomy over an enteral stent. But otherwise, in the neoadjuvant setting, probably a NJ placement, or maybe as Dr. Azhar and a lot of people agreed that they might just offer surgery to this patient in the absence of bulky nodal disease. Then we could take up more questions, Dr. Shefali.
Can I add one more
Yeah,
point to
so you Yes,
Yeah,
yes,
somebody
please,
was
sir. Yeah.
saying something.
Yeah, can I
Dr.
add one
Piyush.
more point to what Dr.
Yeah,
Vivek
yeah,
just
yeah.
mentioned, since they are
Yeah, sure,
students?
sure.
So if we look at gastric outlet obstruction patients, and we have discussed extensively that they should be candidates for surgery, all the more for a very simple reason that this disease is actually progressing locally very fast. This disease, this patient is presenting with a local progress and requires some loco-regional robust therapy rather than a systemic therapy. I think so that is
Okay,
very important.
that's an interesting viewpoint there, Dr. Piyush. And probably in the sense that even if it was a small tumor locally and metastatic disease, the biology would also be bad, more a candidate of systemic therapy. So there's a point there. Probably this is something which needs to be studied a bit more. And the literature as of now doesn't reflect it that much, but yes, it does makes a lot of sense there. And definitely.
So,
This is where
Dr.
actually
Vivek,
the
you
role
can
of
go through
staging
the.
laparoscopy comes, Vivek. Whenever
Sorry?
there is a patient of, these are the patient where a staging laparoscopy is a decent strategy to plan. You do staging laparoscopy if you think that disease is resectable, duodenal systems are all right, is free from pancreatic head. You can go ahead
Yeah.
with a kind of a gastrectomy and followed by decide what to do next, subsequent to
Yes,
surgery.
yes, yes,
This
yes,
is where
yes.
a lot of changes have
Yes, yes,
come in
yes.
recent times.
So Dr. Mukund used to be my senior at All India Institute. He said that it's a comment, and I'll let one of the other surgeons make a comment on that. Resection is the best palliation. Only if the patient is able to maintain reasonable nutrition, neoadjuvant therapy can be given. So Dr. Azhar, you want to take that comment? You would like to reply to that comment?
It's actually partially correct, but regarding resection is best palliation. Now, when you talk about palliation, there are two sorts. One is to palliate symptom like gastric outlet obstruction, which you have already discussed.
Yeah.
But if you are talking about a palliative gastrectomy in the presence of a systemic disease, it is contraindicated based on the Reggaeton trial published recently. In presence of even oligometastatic liver disease, you should not do any palliative thing. Palliative thing should be for symptomatic like bleeding or gastric outlet obstruction. And I totally agree with you that surgery can be a very good way of palliation, except
So-
in metastatic disease
So
system.
in the setting of metastatic disease and gastric outlet obstruction, you would consider a bypass or a resection, Dr. Azhar. There is no significant bleeding there.
Bypass.
Bypass.
Yeah.
So I think that's an important point there, that if a patient has a metastatic disease and you expect that this patient may not do too well in the long run, one short chance at chemotherapy is taken away, you try a heroic resection and the patient has complications because of that. Now this patient is definitely not going to do well
Yeah,
at all.
this has recently been proved by the recent Reggaeton trial that even in presence of single oligometastatic disease, palliative resection should not be considered.
Yeah.
So another question, I think another question on the group is that standard of care at respective centers for a tumor in antrum with no obvious nodes on CT scan and with no gastric outlet obstruction. Somehow, I think I could answer for Dr. Azhar. Dr. Azhar probably would take up this patient for surgery. And
Yes.
Somehow in our setup, we see very few of these patients directly coming to us. So most of them would end up having a neoadjuvant chemotherapy and then only having a surgery. And somehow my thing with these scans has been that you always find the disease to be a little more at surgery than what you see on the scan somehow. And so we are happy giving neoadjuvant chemotherapy to most of these patients prior to their surgery in the setting of tumor in the antrum. Obviously, we are talking of a tumor which is obviously visible on the scan, which would be T2, T3.
See, actually, Vivek, there is no harm in using perioperative therapy basically because end of the day, what we need to know that there are certain limitations.
Yes,
And
yes, absolutely, absolutely. I
surgical
totally agree
quality
there.
control is not great. Then
Yes.
it is better to consider some sort of multimodality pre-op instead of post-op because post-op often you fail. Pre-op you might likely to succeed.
Yeah. So, Dr. Shefali, I think I have covered all the questions. Do you see any which we have not?
Absolutely. I can see nothing left which we have not discussed. I think you have covered elaborately everything. And thank you, Dr. Vivek. Thank you, Dr. Azhar, Dr. Amit, Dr.
Thank you.
Madhan, Dr. Ashutosh. So, Dr. Piyush, and so wonderful discussion. So, I think everybody is wiser at the end of the day after having this elaborate discussion. I thank you all for your time and contribution. And any thoughts from any other, panelist or faculty or anybody wants to share is most welcome. So otherwise, I think we should close the session. It's already 9 o'clock, close to 9.
So,
Yeah.
anybody in the audience, whosoever wants to maybe make a comment or ask a question, we would be happy to answer, or we would be happy to take that comment as well.
I have
The
a
aim is
comment
that
to make,
it's
Vivek.
a multi-way learning process. You
Yes,
could
sir,
introduce
please.
yourself, please.
Yeah.
Yeah, see you soon.
Yes, sir, Dr. Azhar. Yeah, it would be good to have this physical meeting, no?
Yeah.
Thank you. So it
Yeah.
was wonderful. It was wonderful.
Good evening,
Thank you.
everyone, please. So any comments or any questions from anybody in the audience? I think if there are none, then we
Yeah,
could,
I think we could end the session. Yes.
yeah, we could end the session, please.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Good evening,
Thank you
everyone.
once
Thanks a
again
lot,
to
Dr.
all of
Shefali, and
you.
thanks a lot to all the
Yeah.
panelists.